Hello, I'm Willgoose Esq and I play in the band Public Service Broadcasting. This is our Southeast London studio sort of hub base. We use this for recording and rehearsing, nominally known as Jackamar Studios. And yeah, here to talk to you at Future Music about how the studio's set up, why it's set up, and kind of things we get up to here. I spend most of the time in here probably on my own because this is where the records are written. So it's a nice big space. This is the biggest of the few rooms that we have here. They're all interconnected. And nice big desk, racks laid out how I wanted it. The desk was kind of, if you want to go as far as calling it designed by me, but designed by me and sort of ordered as flat pack and assembled, all the rack stuff put in so everything's the right height, the right place, the right kind of number of units to fit what we need. All the acoustic treatment was done by me as well, so it's all very sort of rough and ready, like very rectangular, but it does the job in terms of keeping the room very dry. We're a bit limited by quite low ceilings here, about 2.4 meters, so you're never going to get a big open expansive sound. So the thinking behind the acoustic treatment across the whole studio was keep it dry, keep it controlled, and yeah, then kind of treat any add any kind of artificial reverb after the fact, I suppose. The studio is based around a Mac Studio, which I mostly use Logic for, but also use Reaper for live stuff, for live pre-production. And we're running a series of Universal Audio Apollos. So we've got two Apollo 16s of different eras, a silver face and a black face, and then an even older Apollo twin, just to get us up to 32 outputs, I think. And the main mixing hub is this Neve R&D Rupert Neve Designs 5060 down here, which kind of is the hub of the studio. Really, it's got talkback on it. It's got various monitoring sources, and handles all the outputs from the UAD stuff. Obviously, various UAD plugins running on anything we do. Got the crucial bit of equipment for most studios, which is the patch bay, where everything interconnects. So all the synths you can see behind me, all the stuff in these racks, this additional rack down here, the space echoes, all the inputs from the drum room next door and the drum room over the way, all come here and appear on that patch bay. And from there, yeah, we go about sort of making noises sound the way we want to try and make them sound. Got various kind of synths to hand. We've got the Nord Stage 3, which is the sort of main MIDI keyboard controller for the studio, as well as being a useful piano and electric piano kind of sound source in itself. We've got I can never bring myself to say Moog, but I suppose it's Moog Voyager RME, which speaks for itself. Got the Decades Dream, which is this kind of modern Black Corporation CS80. Inspired synth, which is very kind of evocative, very rich sounding, and then various other bits and bobs really. Got Kemper for guitar stuff and an OctaTrack for kind of sequencing and processing and kind of interesting sound generation, and a couple of reverb units, as well as an Elektron digitone sitting on this little drawer here. So you've got the Otto BAM and the Chase Bliss / Meris CXM 1978. And yeah, the digitone, and all relatively easy to use, all ready to go, no barriers in the way of creativity. If something wants to be plugged in and used, it's kind of usually pretty simple and pretty quick to get up and running. You don't have to be moving stuff around while you're doing it. Yeah, that's kind of the main hub of how this place works and how music gets made here. So one of the first things I'd like to show you in a bit more detail is the Elektron OctaTrack, which is I think this is the Mark II, the second kind of iteration that they brought out. Still eagerly awaiting a Mark III if anyone from Elektron is listening, because there's definitely a lot more that this could do, but it's a fantastic kind of tool for manipulation and sound design and sequencing. So this comes in really handy when you've kind of got a sound that you need to animate, or when you've got something that is kind of quite a staticky thing and you want to get a bit more movement into it. I had an idea for a song that had a kind of guitar line that I thought was great, and until I actually recorded it as a demo, at which point I realised it got really boring and annoying really quickly, and I didn't really know what to do with it from that point. So what I started doing was just mucking around with kind of reverb tails and stuff, and just kind of using the same bass notes. It was like a 3-note chord, just play it into the Otto BAM, which is kind of like an 80s reverb box, and you know, once I'd kind of got the 3 notes in there and got a bit of kind of modulated reverb going on, just hitting the freeze button. And so I went from a kind of arpeggiated guitar part to just having a kind of synthy pad sound, which is a guitar that just sounds like this. So that is just a frozen kind of reverb tail of 3 notes on a guitar. And then I pitched that down, put an LFO to it with a certain rhythm, added quite a lot of distortion, added a filter sweep on the kind of scene control here. And so you go from this kind of sound of potentially texturally interesting, but musically and kind of rhythmically boring, to having a sound like this. So that's pitched down an octave, and then add the octave above for even more kind of energy and excitement, really. And just play around with the reverb and the distortion especially. And that's really where the whole kind of rhythm and idea for the track Electro off the new record came from. Everything kind of ended up working to that same rhythm. So when the drums were recorded and kind of came in, it's with that original sound that you can hear. It's all kind of sequenced together. That same pulsing, that's all from the original sequence, which is done on the Elektron, and all just from a basic idea of how can I get some movement into, you know, into a sound that I like, but that I think could be a lot more interesting. And the Elektron units in general are great for that. The sequencers on them are amazing in terms of like this kind of granular level of control you can have. So stopping that LFO for those 2 notes, you know, when it's just that kind of sequencing on, it's really easy to do, really quick. Once you've worked with it enough to become kind of quite confident with it, it's quick to work with. And it's very kind of tactile, it's very hands-on. You're not looking at a screen, you're not kind of, you know, you're actually working with your hands, you're working with your brain, and you're just getting these musical ideas kind of out via these unusual and interesting tools in a quick and expressive way. So it's really an invaluable thing to have in the studio, and I don't see it leaving its kind of prized position anytime soon. I mixed the first 4 records in a space probably about a third as big as this, which was the back 2/3 of a single garage on the end of our house here in southeast London. And you know, we were very lucky. I was very lucky to have that space to work in, but it was also, you know, it got cramped, and as more and more gear was accrued, as more and more gear tends to be accrued, it just got more and more kind of oppressive and kind of semi-claustrophobic. And then I was lucky enough in 2019, when I was writing our record Bright Magic, I was lucky enough to go to Berlin for 10 months and rent a room at Hansa Studios, which was beautiful and large and had loads of space and had natural light, and it had everything you could possibly want in a studio, sounded incredible, you know, really prestigious address. And then moved back from Berlin to my garage and was really rather depressed. So I set about trying to find somewhere local and affordable to rent in London, which is not an easy feat. But thankfully, through a friend of a friend, I heard about this place being kind of put together and was in contact with a guy who kind of built these rooms as properly spec kind of rooms within rooms, you know, specially treated so that you don't get much sound, if anything at all, from outside. Apart from when the kids from neighbouring flats are running across the roof, but that happens relatively rarely. Yeah, so I heard about these rooms coming available and ended up taking on 4 of them, asking for these 2 that are kind of sitting next to each other to be knocked together so we could have a small drum booth attached to the main live room, and then the other 2 kind of one for storage and one for additional kind of live performance, really. And that's how it ended up being this. So the room was a shell when I got it. There was nothing here. There's plasterboard on the walls, and I took the decision to try and make it have some kind of greenery in it. So we've got this kind of green motif wallpaper, just to try and get a bit of the outside inside when you haven't got any natural daylight. And yeah, just try and make it a nice looking, kind of nice feeling, relaxing space to walk into, and a nice place to spend time making music. And thankfully, I don't know how it happened, but thankfully it seems to have worked. I'd say my approach to synth has kind of changed a bit over the years as well. In that I've been lucky to start kind of getting hold of more physical analog synths and kind of embracing them for their idiosyncrasies as much as using soft synths. I don't really use that many soft synths, if any, actually, these days. And one of the ones I got hold of for the last record was Korg Mono Poly, which I'm sure many of your readers/viewers will be familiar with anyway, but as a kind of nuts and bolts explainer of it, it's a weird synth. I don't think it was very successful when it came out because a lot of people couldn't really get their head around what's it for. You know, I've got the Poly 6 beneath it, and that was a lot easier to understand. It's kind of similar to a Juno. It's 6-voice analog synth with kind of fun modulation and stuff like that on it, but not that hard to kind of get your head around. But the Mono Poly has such a kind of odd architecture, but I think if you're willing to kind of embrace that and play with it and muck around with it, then that's when the inspiration comes. And that's a whole song just came out of, you know, experiencing this for the first proper time, mucking around a bit, and then finding that because of the way that you play it, it lent itself to writing a song. And yeah, as I said, pretty much a whole piece of music just came out of it like that, which is worth its weight in gold. So what you've got 4 oscillators. They're all individually controllable. You can switch the waveform per oscillator. You can have differentiation of tuning per oscillator. You can have octave per oscillator. So you can have individual level control per oscillator. And at its most simple, you can just have it all in unison. And that's not working. Analog synths, great. So yeah, that's, you know, that's unison, that's fine. Easy to get your head around, I suppose. It can be quite a big sound. Where it becomes a bit more interesting, there's 2 ways it becomes a bit more interesting, I think. One is if you're using the arpeggiator and you've slowed the arpeggiator right the way down, because then what happens when you play a note is it cycles through the oscillators voice by voice. So you can take something as simple as just one note, and because of the 4 different oscillators, it's going to cycle through them. I've got them set to different pitches, slightly different waveforms. Just going to play one note and, you know. It's a very simple kind of illustration of it, but because of the way that you can kind of control each oscillator individually like that, so easily, so visually right in front of you, and you know, you can muck around with it in a much more artful way than that when you're better versed with the instrument, you know, you get these kind of interesting patterns out of it. But the other way, and the way that actually ended up working for the song itself, was if you're kind of holding down, say, 3 notes, which are the 3 notes that I held down, those are kind of sustained in the background. But if you then add a bass note to that, and this 4th voice, I don't know if you can see, but the 3 oscillator lights for oscillators 1, 2 and 3 are already lit up, so those are active. And then as soon as I add this one, they actually all re-trigger, so you get this kind of like really cool pulsing pad effect. And it ended up sounding like this for the record. And again, I don't think I would have had the idea to play a synth like... It doesn't sound the same anyway when you do it like that. So it's because of the unique architecture behind it, and again, the physicality of actually getting your hands on something unusual, that you end up with that. And for the chorus part, I ended up kind of doing a little 3-way arpeggio inverted at times. So the first time around it would go... Second time... But because those first 3 oscillators are tuned to 1 octave above, normal, normal, you kind of get that differentiation in pitch between. So even playing the same 3 notes just in a different order, you're kind of getting that variation and that interest in there. And then just adding bits of noise in there, you know. yeah, it's just really fun. And I think if you're having fun while you're making music, then you're more likely to make interesting music. I think the biggest challenge we've got in this space is the ceiling height, probably, because that's always going to restrict what you can do in terms of getting, for example, a really good drum sound. Just as kind of a lower ceiling is always going to feel a little bit oppressive. I think that was why I ended up going with a kind of, really dry the room out, have a lot of acoustic treatment, a really short reverb time, not just in here but in the other kind of acoustic environments, and then set about ways of kind of trying to recreate a realistic kind of physical space if you need to, when you're kind of trying to create a much bigger drum sound, after the fact. So yeah, that's the biggest challenge here is just the physical size of the rooms. But having said that, I'm also extremely aware of how lucky we are to have somewhere like this, in a London that's affordable and run by decent people, and to have found it close to where I live, and where we can all kind of operate out of as a base. It's very, very fortunate set of circumstances for us. Another tool that I find really useful, kind of sonic, I suppose, sound design wise, it's something that a lot of people can be very familiar with, if not the original units and certainly the emulations, is the space echo. So I bought one of these and then swiftly realised that I needed two so I could have stereo effects going on. They're not identical units in any way at all. They're both kind of calibrated to different levels. They both have different ages of tape in them. They both react differently to different kind of signals. But that doesn't really bother me because I'm not really using them to be kind of pristine sources of echo. I'm using them to kind of be almost like agents of chaos, really. And I think what I've learned from kind of years of working more on the screen and with software stuff versus actually having kind of physical units here is that there are moments of creativity that you're more likely to find if you have kind of large physical tactile controls in front of you that you're just kind of playing around with. There's a reason they call it playing music, and I think it's because you should be encouraged to be creative, you should be encouraged to play with the tools that are at your disposal. That's where a lot of ideas come from. And if you're solely restricted to using a mouse and a keyboard and kind of stuff on screen, you can get great results that way, but I find it's not always the most spontaneous way of working. And as I say, these little agents of chaos, just much more fun in some respects. So I use them to get a bit of grit on things, I use them to get a bit of extra rhythm on things, and what I find them really super useful for is as almost audio glue, really, to kind of bolt two different sections of the same song together. So in Electra, for example, the same song that we were talking about with the OctaTrack, they're just kind of used on a particular heavily affected drum sequence, and then the intensity is ramped up just to give that kind of spill and that wash of effects as we move from one section of the song to another. And it really just kind of glues the whole thing together in a way that conventional effects would struggle to do, I think. So on their own, the drums would sound like this. They're kind of, there's no bass drum, they're heavily filtered, and they just sound like this. So you can hear it's kind of like a distorted drum loop, just based on kind of hi-hat and snare. There's quite a fast filter, kind of envelope filter attacking the snare to kind of give it that kind of, kind of like that sweep downwards. But if you add the space echoes into the equation, you just get those little kind of fun echoes and stuff really happening. Now this is too much. I wouldn't have it that loud. And that's useful in and of itself, but if you just want to kind of ramp up the intensity and pretend this is like a spillover situation, then that's the sound you're after, really. And then you can... all that kind of stuff is just much more likely to happen if you've got the unit in front of you and you just see a control and you feel like grabbing it and playing with it. There's been a number of times in the past where just when dubbing stuff in, I've just got a bit bored and started fiddling with it, and the parts change as a result. So they're really, they're really fantastic units, and they've stood the test of time for a very good reason, for many good reasons actually. I think if I were to go through this process again on another site, I think honestly the two main additions I would make, one would be some kind of natural daylight. I think it makes a big difference to Mental health. I make a lot of cups of tea, so I do get out of the room quite a lot anyway, but it does have an effect on you, I think, especially if you're working, as I tend to most of the time, in isolation. I think it's nice to have, some reminder of the outside world. So that would be one change I would make. It's obviously not an easy one to bring into an acoustically controlled environment, is to have light and therefore a window letting light in and probably sound out and sound in. So I'm aware of the complications behind it and the reasons why you would take the decision not to get involved with it, but at the same time, that would be one of the big changes I'd make. And the other would be, I'd love just to have a big kind of vaulted ceiling, really, I suppose, like the kind of the archetypal like barn conversion type thing. Just a few more options, because you can always make a bigger space sound smaller, but really the options for making a small space sound bigger acoustically are pretty limited, and so you are kind of heading down the road of modelling rooms and kind of artificial reverbs and that kind of thing, which is fine, and it has actually worked really well for the new record, I think. But it's just nice to have that kind of open environment to work in. But I'm just really grateful to be in this place, to be honest, and to have much more room to be able to work, to be able to invite other people here to sort of, hang around and chat. It's just nice, because in the other place I couldn't fit more than one chair. So, this is a real step up for us.